Shirley by Charlotte Bronte, Chapter 12, Shirley and Caroline. Excuse me. Shirley showed she had been sincere in saying she should be glad of Caroline's society by frequently seeking it, and indeed, if she had not sought it, she would not have had it. For Miss Helstone was slow to make fresh acquaintance. She was always held back by the idea that people could not want her, that she could not assume them, and a brilliant, happy, youthful creature like the heiress of a Fieldhead seemed to her too completely independent of society, so uninteresting as hers ever, to find it really welcome. Shirley might be brilliant and probably happy likewise, but no one is independent of genial society, and though in about a month she had made the acquaintance of most of the families round, and was on quite free and easy terms with all the Mrs. Sykes and all the Mrs. Pearson and the two superlative Miss Wynne of Walden Hall, yet it appeared she found none amongst them very genial. She fraternised with none of them. To use her own words, if she had had the bliss to be really Shirley Kildare, Esquire, Lord of the Manor of Briarfield, there was not a single fair one in this and the two neighbouring parishes whom she should have felt disposed to request to become Mrs. Kildare, Lady of the Manor. This declaration she made to Mrs. Prior, who received it very quietly, as she did most her pupils' off-hand speeches, responding, "My dear, do not allow that habit of alluding to yourself as a gentleman to be confirmed. It is a strange one. Those who do not know you, hearing you speak thus, would think you affected masculine manners." Shirley never laughed at her former governess. Even the little formalities and harmless peculiarities of that lady were respectable in her eyes. Had it been otherwise, she would have proved herself a weak character at once, for it is only the weak who make a butt of quiet worth. Therefore she took her remonstrance in silence. She stood quietly near the window, looking at the grand cedar on her lawn, watching a bird on one of its lower boughs. Presently she began to chirrup to the bird. Soon her chirrup grew clearer. Ere long she was whistling. The whistle struck into a tune, and very sweetly and deftly it was executed. "My dear," expostulated Mrs. Prior. "Was I whistling?" said Shirley. "I forgot. I beg your pardon, ma'am. I had resolved to take care not to whistle before you." "But, Miss Kildare, where did you learn to whistle? You must have got the habit since you came down into Yorkshire. I never knew you guilty of it before." "Oh, I learned to whistle a long while ago." "Who taught you?" "No one. I took it up by my listening, and I had laid it down again. But lately, yesterday evening, as I was coming up our lane, I heard a gentleman whistling that very tune in the field on the other side of the hedge, and it reminded me." "What gentleman was it?" "We've only one gentleman in this region, ma'am, and that is Mr. Moore. At least he is the only gentleman who is not grey-haired. My two venerable favourites, Mr. Helstone and Mr. Yorke, it is true, are fine old beaux, infinitely better than any of the stupid young ones." Mrs. Prior was silent. "You do not like Mr. Helstone, ma'am?" "My dear, Mr. Helstone's office secures him from criticism." "You generally contrive to leave the room when he is announced." "Do you walk out this morning, my dear?" "Yes, I shall go to the rectory and seek and find Caroline Helstone and make her take some exercise. She shall have a breezy walk over Nunley Common." "If you go in that direction, my dear, have the goodness to remind Miss Helstone to wrap up well, as there is a fresh wind, and she appears to me to require care." "You shall be minutely obeyed, Mrs. Prior. Meantime, will you not accompany us yourself?" "No, my love, I should be a restraint upon you. I am stout and cannot walk so quickly as you would wish to do." Shirley, easily persuaded Caroline to go with her, and when they were fairly out on the quiet road, traversing the extensive and solitary sweep of Nunley Common, she as easily drew her into conversation. The first feelings of diffidence overcome, Caroline soon felt glad to talk to Miss Kildare. The very first interchange of slight observations sufficed to give each an idea of what the other was. Shirley said she liked the green sweep of the common turf, and better still the heath on its ridges, for the heath reminded her of moors. She had seen moors when she was travelling on the borders near Scotland. She remembered particularly a district traversed one long afternoon on a sultry but sunless day in summer. They journeyed from noon till sunset over what seemed a boundless waste of deep heath, and nothing had they seen but wild sheep, nothing heard but the cries of wild birds. "I know how the heath would look on such a day," said Caroline. "Purple black, a deeper shade of the sky tint, and that would be livid." "Yes, quite livid, with brassy edges to the clouds, and here and there a white gleam, more ghastly than the lurid tinge which, as you looked at it, you momentarily expected would kindle into blinding lightning." "Did it thunder?" "It muttered distant peals, but the storm did not break till evening, after we had reached our inn, that inn being an isolated house at the foot of a range of mountains." "Did you watch the clouds come down over the mountains?" "I did. I stood at the window an hour watching them. The hills seemed rolled in a sullen mist, and when the rain fell in whitening sheets, suddenly they were blotted from the prospect. They were washed from the world." "I have seen such storms in hilly districts in Yorkshire, and at their riotous climax, while the sky was at cataract, the earth all flood. I have remembered the deluge." "It is singularly reviving after such hurricanes to feel calm return, and from the opening clouds to receive a consolatory gleam, softly testifying that the sun is not quenched." "Miss Kildare, just stand still now and look down at Nunley Dale of the wood and wood." They both halted on the green brow of the common. They looked down on the deep valley robbed in May raiment, on varied meads, some pearled with daisies, some golden with kingcups. Today all this young verdure smiled clear in sunlight. Transparent emerald and amber gleams played over it. On Nunwood, the sole remnant of antique British forest in a region whose lowlands were once all sylvan chase, as its highlands were breast-deep heather, slept the shadow of a cloud. The distant hills were dappled, the horizon was shaded and tinted like mother of pearl, silvery blues, soft purples, evanescent greens and rose shades, all melting into fleeces of white cloud, pure as azure snow, allured the eyes as with a remote glimpse of heaven's foundations. The air blowing on the brow was fresh and sweet and bracing. "Our England is a bonny island," said Shirley, "and Yorkshire is one of her bonniest nooks." "You are a Yorkshire girl too." "I am. Yorkshire in blood and birth. 5 generations of my race sleep under the aisles of Briarfield Church. I drew my first breath in the old black hall behind us." Hereupon Caroline presented her hand, which was accordingly taken and shaken. "We are compatriots," said she. "Yes," agreed Shirley with a grave nod. "And that," asked Miss Kildare, pointing to the forest, "that is Nunwood?" "It is. Were you ever there?" "Many a time." "In the heart of it?" "Yes." "What is it like?" "It is like an encampment of forest sons of Anak. The trees are huge and old. When you stand at their roots, the summits seem in another region. The trunks remain still and firm as pillars, while the boughs sway in every breeze. In the deepest calm, their leaves are never quite hushed, and in high wind a flood rushes, a sea thunders above you." "Was it not not one of Robin Hood's haunts? Yes, and there are mementos of him still existing. To penetrate into Nunwood, Miss Kildare, is to go far back into the dim days of eld. Can you see a break in the forest about the centre? Yes, distinctly. That break is a dell, a deep hollow cup, lined with turf as green and short as the sod of this common. The very oldest of trees, gnarled mighty oaks, crowd about the brink of this dell. In the bottom lie the ruins of a nunnery. Will we go, you and I alone, Caroline, to that wood, early some fine summer morning, and spend a long day there? We can take pencils and sketchbooks and any interesting reading book we like. And of course we shall take something to eat. I have 2 little baskets in which Miss Gill, my housekeeper, might pack our provisions, and we could carry each our own. It would not tire you too much to walk so far. Oh no, especially if we rested the whole day in the wood, and I know all the pleasantest spots. I know where we could get nuts in nutting time. I know where wild strawberries abound. I know certain lonely, quite untrodden glades, carpeted with strange mosses, some yellow as if gilded, some a sober grey, some gem green. I know groups of trees that ravish the eye with their perfect picture-like effects. Rude oak, delicate birch, glossy beech, clustered in contrast, and ash tree stately as Saul, standing isolated, and superannuated wood giants clad in bright shrouds of ivy. Miss Kildare, I could guide you. You would be dull with me alone. I should not. I think we should suit. And what third person is there whose presence would not spoil our pleasure? Indeed, I know of none about our own ages, no lady at least. And as to gentlemen, an excursion becomes quite a different thing when there are gentlemen of the party, interrupted Caroline. I agree with you, quite a different thing to what we were proposing. We were going simply to see the old trees, the old ruins, to pass the day in old times, surrounded by olden silence, and above all by quietude. You are right, and the presence of gentlemen dispels the last charm, I think. If they are of the wrong sort, like your Malones and your young Sykes and Wynnes, irritation takes the place of serenity. If they are the right sort, there is still a change. I can hardly tell what change. One easy to feel, difficult to describe. We forget nature imprimis. And then nature forgets us, covers her vast calm brow with a dim veil, conceals her face and withdraws the peaceful joy with which, if we had been content to worship her only, we would have filled our hearts. What does she give us instead? More elation and more anxiety and excitement that steals the hours away fast, and a trouble that ruffles their course. Our power of being happy lies a good deal in ourselves, I believe, remarked Caroline sagely. I have gone to Nunwood with a large party, all the curates and some other gentry of these parts, together with sundry ladies, and I found the affair insufferably tedious and absurd. I have gone quite alone, or accompanied but by Fanny, who sat in the woodman's hut and sewed, or talked to the good wife, while I roamed about and made sketches or read, and I have enjoyed much happiness of a quiet kind all day long. But that was when I was young, 2 years ago. Did you ever go with your cousin Robert Moore? Yes, once. What sort of companion is he on those occasions? A cousin, you know, is different to a stranger. I'm aware of that, but cousins, if they are stupid, are still more insupportable than strangers, because you cannot so easily keep them at a distance. But your cousin is not stupid. No, but... Well, if the company of fools irritates, as you say, the society of clever men, leaves its own peculiar pain also. The society of clever men leaves its own peculiar pain also, where the goodness or talent of your friend is beyond and above all doubt. Your own worthiness to be his associate often becomes a matter of question. No, there I cannot follow you. That crotchet is not one I should choose to entertain for an instant. I consider myself not unworthy to be the associate of the best of them, of gentlemen, I mean, though that is saying a great deal. Where they are good, they are very good, I believe. Your uncle, by the by, is not a bad specimen of the elderly gentleman. I am always glad to see his brown, keen, sensible old face, either in my house or any other. Are you fond of him? Is he kind to you? Now speak the truth. He has brought me up from childhood, I doubt not precisely as he would have brought up his own daughter if he had had one, and that is kindness. But I am not fond of him. I would rather be out of his presence than in it. Strange, when he has the art of making himself so agreeable. Yes, in company, but he is stern and silent at home. As he puts away his cane and shovel hat in the rectory hall, so he locks his liveliness in his bookcase and study desk. The knitted brow, the brief word for the fireside, the smile, the jest, the witty sally for society. Is he tyrannical? Not in the least. He is neither tyrannical nor hypocritical. He is simply a man who is rather liberal than good-natured, rather brilliant than genial, rather scrupulously equitable than truly just. If you can understand such superfine distinctions. Oh, yes, good-natured implies indulgence, which he has not, geniality, warmth of heart, which he does not own, and genuine justice is the offspring of sympathy and considerateness, of which I can well conceive my bronze old friend is quite innocent. I often wonder, Shirley, whether most men resemble my uncle in their domestic relations, whether it is necessary to be new and unfamiliar to them in order to seem agreeable or estimable in their eyes, and whether it is impossible to their natures to retain a constant interest and affection for those they see every day. I don't know. I can't clear up your doubts. I ponder over similar ones myself sometimes. But to tell you a secret, if I were convinced that they are necessarily and universally different from us, fickle, soon petrifying, unsympathizing, I would never marry. I should not like to find out that what I loved did not love me, that it was weary of me, and that whatever effort I might make to please would hereafter be worse than useless, since it was inevitable in its nature to change and become indifferent. That discovery once made, what should I long for? To go away, to remove from a presence where my society gave no pleasure? But you could not if you were married. No, I could not. There it is. I can never be my own mistress more. A terrible thought. It suffocates me. Nothing irks me like the idea of being a burden and a bore, an inevitable burden, a ceaseless bore. Now, when I feel my company superfluous, I can comfortably fold my independence round me like a mantle, and drop my pride like a veil, and withdraw to solitude. If married, that could not be. I wonder we don't all make up our minds to remain single, said Caroline. We should if we listened to the wisdom of experience. My uncle always speaks of marriage as a burden, and I believe whenever he hears of a man being married, he invariably regards him as a fool, or at any rate as doing a foolish thing. But Caroline, men are not all like your uncle, surely not. I hope not. She paused and mused. I suppose we each find an exception in the one we love, till we are married, suggested Caroline. I suppose so, and this exception we believe to be of sterling materials. We fancied, like ourselves, we imagine a sense of harmony. We think his voice gives the softest, truest promise of a heart that will never harden against us. We read in his eyes that faithful feeling, affection. I don't think we should trust to what they call passion at all, Caroline. I believe it is a mere fire of dry sticks, blazing up and vanishing. But we watch him and we see him kind to animals, to little children, to poor people. He's kind to us likewise, good, considerate. He does not flatter women, but he is patient with them, and he seems to be easy in their presence, and to find their company genial. He likes them not only for vain and selfish reasons, but as we like him, because we like him. Then we observe that he is just, that he always speaks the truth, that he is conscientious. We feel joy and peace when he comes into a room. We feel sadness and trouble when he leaves it. We know that this man has been a kind son, that he is a kind brother. Will anyone dare to tell me that he will not be a kind husband? My uncle would affirm it unhesitatingly. He will be sick of you in a month. He will be sick of you in a month, he would say. Mrs. Pryor would seriously imitate the same. Mrs. York and Miss Mao would darkly suggest ditto. If they are true oracles, it is good never to fall in love. Very good if you can avoid it. I choose to doubt their truth. I'm afraid that proves you're already caught. Not I, but if I were, do you know what soothsayers I would consult? Let me hear. Neither man nor woman, elderly nor young, the little Irish beggar that comes barefoot to my door, the mouse that steals out of the cranny in the wainscot, the bird that in frost and snow pecks at my window for a crumb, the dog that licks my hand and sits beside my knee. Did you ever see anyone who was kind to such things? Did you ever see anyone whom such things seemed instinctively to follow, like rely on? We have a black cat and an old dog at the rectory. I know somebody to whose knee that black cat loves to climb, against whose shoulder and cheek it likes to purr. The old dog always comes out of his kennel and wags his tail and whines affectionately when somebody passes. And what does that somebody do? He quietly strokes the cat and lets her sit a while. He conveniently can, and when he must disturb her by rising, he puts her softly down and never flings her from him roughly. He always whistles to the dog and gives him a caress. Does he? Is it not Robert? But it is Robert. Handsome fellow, said Shirley with enthusiasm. Her eyes sparkled. Is he not handsome? Has he not fine eyes and well-cut features and a dear princely forehead? He has all that, Caroline, bless him. He is both graceful and good. I was sure you would see that he was. When I first looked at your face, I knew you would. I was well inclined to him before I saw him. I liked him when I did to see him. I admire him now. There is charm in beauty for itself. Caroline, when is it blent with goodness? When it is blent with goodness, there is a powerful charm. When mind is added, Shirley. Who can resist it? Remember my uncle, Mesdames Pryor, York, and Man. Remember the croaking of the frogs of Egypt. He is a noble being. I tell you, when they are good, they are lords of the creation. They are the sons of God, moulded in their Maker's image. The minutest spark of his spirit lifts them almost above mortality. Indisputably a great good. Handsome man is the first of created things. Above us? I would scorn to contend for empire with him. I would scorn it. Shall my left hand dispute for precedence with my right? Shall my heart quarrel with my pulse? Shall my veins be jealous of the blood which fills them? Men and women, husbands and wives, quarrel horribly, Shirley. Poor things, poor fooling degenerate things. God made them for another lot, for other feelings. But are we men's equals, or are we not? Nothing ever charms me more than when I meet my superior, one who makes me sincerely feel that he is my superior. Did you ever meet him? I should be glad to see him any day. The higher above me, so much the better. It degrades to stoop. It is glorious to look up. What frets me is that when I try to esteem, I am baffled. When religiously inclined, there are but false gods to adore. I disdain to be a pagan. Miss Kildare, will you come in? We are here at the rectory gates. Not today, but tomorrow. I shall fetch you to spend the evening with me. Caroline Helstone, if you really are what you present to me you seem, you and I will suit. I have never in my whole life been able to talk to a young lady as I have talked to you this morning. Kiss me and goodbye. Mrs. Pryor seemed as well disposed to cultivate Caroline's acquaintance as Shirley. She, who went nowhere else, called on an early day at the rectory. She came in the afternoon, when the rector happened to be out. It was rather a close day. The heat of the weather had flushed her, and she seemed fluttered too by the circumstance of entering a strange house, for it appeared her habits were most retiring and secluded. When Miss Helstone went to her in the dining-room, she found her seated on the sofa, trembling, fanning herself with her handkerchief, and seeming to contend with the nervous discomposure that threatened to become hysterical. Caroline marvelled somewhat at this unusual want of self-command in a lady of her years, and also at the lack of real strength in one who appeared almost robust, for Mrs. Pryor hastened to allege the fatigue of her walk, the heat of the sun, etc., as reasons for her temporary indisposition, and still as, with more hurry than coherence, she again and again enumerated these causes of exhaustion, Caroline gently sought to relieve her by opening her shawl and removing her bonnet. Attentions of this sort Mrs. Pryor would not have accepted from everyone. In general, she recoiled from touch or close approach with a mixture of embarrassment and coldness, far from flattering to those who offered her aid. To Miss Helstone's little light hand, however, she yielded tractably and seemed soothed by its contact. In a few minutes she ceased to tremble and grew quiet and tranquil. Her usual manner being resumed, she proceeded to talk of ordinary topics. In a miscellaneous company, Mrs. Pryor rarely opened her lips, or, if obliged to speak, she spoke under restraint, and consequently not well. In dialogue she was a good converser. Her language, always a little formal, was well chosen. Her sentiments were just. Her information was varied and correct. Caroline felt it pleasant to listen to her, more pleasant than she could have anticipated. On the wall opposite the sofa, where they had sat, hung 3 pictures. The centre one above the mantelpiece, that of a lady, the 2 others male portraits. "This is a beautiful face," said Mrs. Pryor, interrupting a brief pause, which had followed half an hour's animated conversation. "The features may be termed perfect. No statuary's chisel could improve them. It is a portrait from the life, I presume." "It is a portrait of Mrs. Helstone." "Of Mrs. Mathewson Helstone, of your uncle's wife?" "It is, and is said to be a good likeness. Before her marriage she was accounted the beauty of the district." "I should say she merited the distinction. What accuracy in all the lineaments! It is, however, a passive face. The original could not have been what is generally termed a woman of spirit." "I believe she was a remarkably still, silent person." "One would scarcely have expected, my dear, that your uncle's choice should have fallen on a partner of that description. Is he not fond of being amused by lively chat?" "In company he is, but he always says he could never do with a talking wife. He must have quiet at home. You go out to gossip, he affirms. You come home to read and reflect." "Mrs. Mathewson lived but a few years after her marriage, I think I have heard." "About 5 years." "Well, my dear," pursued Mrs. Pryor, rising to go, "I trust it is understood that you will frequently come to Fieldhead. I hope you will. You must feel lonely here, having no female relative in the house. You must necessarily pass much of your time in solitude." "I am injured to it. I have grown up by myself. May I arrange your shawl for you?" Mrs. Pryor submitted to be assisted. "Should you chance to require help in your studies," she said, "you may command me." Caroline expressed her sense of such kindness. "I hope you have frequent conversations with you. I should wish to be of use to you." Again Miss Helstone returned thanks. She thought what a kind heart was hidden under her visitor's seeming chilliness. Observing that Mrs. Pryor again glanced with an air of interest towards the portraits as she walked down the room, Caroline casually explained, "The likeness that hangs near the window, you will see, is my uncle, taken 20 years ago. The other, to the left of the mantelpiece, is his brother James, my father." "They resemble each other in some measure," said Mrs. Pryor, "yet a difference of character may be traced in the different mould of the brow and mouth." "What difference?" inquired Caroline, accompanying her to the door. "James Helstone, that is my father, is generally considered the best looking of the two. Strangers, I remark, always exclaim, 'What a handsome man!' Do you think his picture handsome, Mrs. Pryor?" "It is much softer or finer featured than that of your uncle." "But where or what is the difference of character to which you alluded? Tell me. I wish to see if you guess right." "My dear, your uncle is a man of principle. His forehead and his lips are firm, and his eye is steady." "Well, and the other? Do not be afraid of offending me. I always like the truth." "Well, and the other? Do not be afraid of offending me. I always like the truth." "Do you like the truth? It is well for you. Adhere to that preference. Never swerve thence. The other, my dear, if he had been living now, would probably have furnished little support to his daughter. It is, however, a graceful head, taken in youth. I should think, my dear," turning abruptly, "you acknowledge an inestimable value in principle." "I'm sure no character can have true worth without it." "You feel what you say. You have considered the subject." "Often. Circumstances early forced it upon my attention." The lesson was not lost then, though it came so prematurely. I suppose the soil is not light nor stony, otherwise seed falling in that season never would have borne fruit. My dear, do not stand in the air of the door. You will take a cold. Good afternoon." Miss Helstone's new acquaintance soon became of value to her. Their society was acknowledged a privilege. She found she would have been in error indeed to have let slip this chance of relief, to have neglected to avail herself of this happy change. A turn was thereby given to her thoughts, a new channel was opened for them, which, diverting a few of them, at least from the one direction in which all had hitherto tended, abated the impetuosity of their rush and lessened the force of their presence on one worn-down point.